Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Ichigo goes beyond mugetsu and harem part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the DiscoStew09 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Ichigo was sitting on Urahara's flying carpet with his legs crossed as they headed in the direction of his house after dropping off Chad, Ishida, and Inoue home. Ichigo had looked over at Urahara and Yoruichi conversing quietly, his thoughts going back to when Aizen stopped his blade with a finger. Ichigo couldn't help but clench his fists tightly and scowl heavily at the memory. Even though he was pretty banged up at that point after his fight with Byakuya, it didn't help him get over it. All he could picture was the shocked feeling at seeing the finger stop his blade, followed by extreme pain in his hip. There was also that fact that his inner hollow had taken over during his fight with Byakuya, having absolutely no control over his own movements. Not being able to stop his hollow from causing destruction scared the hell out of him. He could see that they were close to his house now before he looked back at Urahara, the man that hadn't told them the truth about what to expect at Soul Society, and for putting the Hogyoku inside of Rukia. He was the only person that Ichigo could go to now in order to receive more training. He was adept at Shurikai, Bankai, and Shunpa, but he needed to get much stronger in case Aizen decided to attack any of his family or friends, and he knew that the only reason he was able to defeat Byakuya was because of his hollow. That fact really pissed him off. If it wasn't for his hollow, he would have died, and in his mind he won unfairly as he wasn't in control of his actions. More disturbingly, after he had recovered from his injuries, he could no longer feel Zangetsu's presence and vowed to talk to Urahara to discover what was wrong. The carpet pulled up to a stop just at the front of his house. As Urahara turned to him to say goodbye, Ichigo spoke up. "Hey, Urahara-san?" Urahara just looked at him curiously, as did everyone else on the carpet, before letting out in him, "Can you teach me more?" Urahara looked surprised at the question before asking him, "Why do you ask? You successfully saved Rukia and now you can go back to your human life, go to school and hang out with your friends." Ichigo looked at him fiercely before telling him, "A finger, that is how Aizen stopped me, with just a finger. What am I supposed to do if he attacks any more of my friends, family, or even Karakura town?" Urahara looked at him sadly from behind his fan, hiding his expression from Ichigo, knowing that he was a big part responsible for Ichigo being involved in all of this. "Okay, Kurosaki-san, it's the least I can do for you. Come by the shop tomorrow after school and we will begin." Ichigo shook his head. "No, I have no intention of going to school. My grades are already high, and I can afford to miss a bit of school. I'll get my dad to inform the school of my leave of absence. I just need to find a reason for him to do that. Tell him that you are an apprentice to the great Urahara Kisuke at the Urahara shop," Urahara said cheerfully with a big grin on his face, while Ichigo just sweat dropped. "Sure, I guess that will work. See you tomorrow. There is one final thing to ask. Ever since I have recovered from my injuries after my fight with Byakuya and Aizen, I haven't been able to sense Zangetsu. Do you know why that is?" Urahara frowned, a theory coming to his mind. "I think I may know what the problem is, and I'll have a solution tomorrow." Ichigo nodded before jumping off the carpet, which sped off into the night as he entered his house to get a good night's rest and to see his family for the first time in weeks. "Well, that was certainly unexpected, wasn't it, Kisuke?" Yoruichi asked as they both sat on top of the Urahara shop not too long after dropping Ichigo off. "He is full of surprises. I never expected him to develop as fast as he had, and also the determination to keep on training when he could easily go back to his normal life and let Soul Society deal with Aizen. He is definitely Ishin's boy." "Yes, he is, and I think we both know what that means, don't we? He won't hesitate to use that technique to defeat Aizen if it came down to it." "At least this time I will be prepared for it, and will have a much quicker way of helping Ichigo than when I helped Ishin." The next morning, Ichigo had a nice reunion with his sisters, the usual Ishin trying to beat him up and he retaliating before telling his dad that he now had an apprenticeship at Urahara's, which to his surprise his father agreed instantly. Ishin called the school and told them Ichigo will be missing a few months, but promised then when he came back he would be up to date on all the work he would miss. With that out the way, Ichigo headed to Urahara's shop, and when he arrived he was greeted by Jinta and Yururu, who were both at the front of the shop sweeping. They told him to head straight to the underground training room, and Ichigo climbed down the huge staircase, and to his surprise when he landed on the ground, he saw Yoruichi and Tensa alongside Urahara. Seeing the surprised look on his face, Urahara informed him, "They are going to assist with your training. I am in charge of your Zanjutsu and your Ryatsu control. Tensai will teach you Kido, both Bakuto and Heido, and Yorichi will improve your Shuinpa and Hakuta skills." Ichigo nodded in understanding before asking what they were going to begin with, and Urahara asked him, "Have you used your Shinigami badge yet?" Ichigo looked startled and answered honestly, "No, I haven't. I guess it will be the first time in a few moments." "Wait a second, Kurosaki-san," Urahara said. "Could I have a look at it, please?" "Sure," Ichigo said, confused as to why Urahara was interested in it, and chucked him the badge. Urahara began fiddling with it for a few minutes, and he seemed to be mumbling something before chucking it back to Ichigo with a pout on his face. "Looks like you no longer my beautiful, awesome practical cane anymore." "Obviously, dumbass. That is the point of the badge." Ichigo retorted and pressed the badge into his chest and entered his Shinigami form whilst Tensai took his body and put it in a safe place. "So what are we doing first?" Ichigo asked his teacher, to which Urahara just smiled at him before throwing him a black glove. After catching it, Ichigo questioned, "What is this for?" Urahara's expression turned serious. "This will temporarily seal away your inner hollow." Ichigo's eyes widened as he looked at the glove in awe before putting it on his right hand, and he could feel the dark presence that had been in the back of his mind disappear. Sighing in relief, he took Zangetsu off his back and prepared for battle. Instead of a formal katana that most Shinigami have, Zangetsu looked more like an oversized elegant cleaver. He had no tsuba and no proper hilt, but cloth-wrapped tang. The sword was 1.75 meters tall, and had a black blade with a silver edge. "So what first?" "First, we are going to seal your shurikai into a katana, and to do that we are going to have to improve your control of your ryatsu." "Huh? Don't you remember what I told you when you were learning bankai?" Yorichi asked him with a grin on her face, seeing Ichigo's confused look. "I told you that your zanpakuto is a full-time release form type because of your vast but uncontrollable ryatsu." "Yes, so? I'll say the same thing I asked Ishida. If my ryatsu is high, shouldn't it remain on its maximum output?" Now Urahara lost the grin on his face that he had since Ichigo got here, becoming serious. "No, in fact it is a very bad thing. Why do you think captains and vice-captains have to have limiters placed on them that conceal 80% of their ryatsu? Do you know how much damage that your leaking ryatsu is causing to the souls of humans, and the fact that it draws many hollows to this town, the town that you wish to protect? If you learn how to suppress your ryatsu, then that would mean less hollows coming to Karakura, and that means less danger for your friends and family." Ichigo was stunned by the amount of danger he was causing just because of his ryatsu control ignorance, and he knew no matter how much he hated this type of training like that stupid sphere, he would have to do it. Because your shurikai is in its full release, when you go back into your body you are still radiating the same amount of ryatsu as when you were in your Shinigami form. So that first step is for Zangetsu to stop giving you his power, and to seal himself. "How do I do that?" "Usually he appears to me or pulls me to him." Urahara sighed. He was more ignorant than he thought. "We will use a method known as Jinzen." "Jinzen?" "This method is the only way to carry on a proper conversation with your zanpakuto. First you have to place your sword over your lap and take a meditative pose, and then force your mind to become one with Zangetsu." Ichigo sat down in a meditative pose that he had learned as a kid when he learned karate, before placing Zangetsu across his lap and tried to join minds. Seeing this, Tensai walked behind Ichigo, taking a swipe at the back of Ichigo's head. However, Ichigo sensed the attack and was just able to avoid it. "Why did you dodge?" Tensai boomed. Ichigo just looked at him in confusion before stating the obvious, "Are you crazy? If I don't dodge, then it's going to hurt. The fact that you dodged my fist means you aren't putting your soul into your sword. Now concentrate, picture your inner world, and connect your soul with your zanpakuto." Ichigo got back into his stance and began connecting with Zangetsu while Urahara, Yorichi, and Tensai watched on patiently. While Ichigo was beginning his training at Urahara's, the rest of the Nakama were attending school, and all three of them of course noticed Ichigo missing. As they sat in class for the start of the day when their teacher Misato Oki entered the room, but after she read out Ichigo's name is what caught their attention. Yes, Kurosaki Ishin rang up earlier and said that Ichigo had just started an apprenticeship at Urahara's shop and will be back in a few months. Such a shame, Ichigo could do much better than that dump. While watching Ichigo, Urahara suddenly sneezed all over his fan, much to Yorichi's amusement. "Damn, Whoever is talking about me just ruined my favorite fan. I will have my revenge. Chad, Inoue and Ishida all nodded to each before Ishida stood up first and announced that he had some family business. Moments later Chad said that he to go to a new job he had just started, and Inoue followed saying she wasn't feeling well. Miss Oki let them go with no problem, as they were high-rated students who could afford to miss a day, but of course, Kigo tried to follow and told the teacher his grandmother was sick and he had to go take care of her, but Miss Oki declined, saying she didn't believe him. The three of them soon headed towards Urahara's shop, curious as to why Ichigo was there and not at school, but all of them had a sneaking suspicion. Do you two think that he has gone there for training? Chad asked, figuring he would be the one to ask the question. That is the most logical outcome, Ishida said. But why? We saved Kichiki-san, and Kurosaki-kun is already strong enough to take on any hollows that attack. Probably because of Aizen, Kurosaki must be training in preparation for another fight with him, or he is just worried that if Aizen attacks Karakura he won't be strong enough. Ishida concluded while bitterly thinking, and I can't do anything since I can't gather Reisure. Why would he attack Karakura? Inoue asked him, confused why a Shinigami would want to attack this town. What would be the gain? Ishida just shrugged, but Chad was one person who didn't talk much. He more communicated through body language, and he could see that Ishida's power loss was really bothering him even if he wasn't coming out and saying it. Is there any way you can recover your powers? Chad asked, but Ishida just looked downcast. No, when I used the Let's Still, I gathered a huge increase of Reisure gathering abilities which helped me absorb a huge amount of energy. However, I could only use it for a short time, as no human body is capable of handling that immense power, and my body started burning up. So my body forcibly sealed itself off from all Ryatsu as self-preservation. While I can still sense people's Ryatsu and see Hollow and Shinigami, and I can't use my powers as my body will no longer let me. So your body is so damaged that you can't use your powers. I'm sorry, Ishida-kun, I know how much you love about your heritage. Inoue told him sympathetically. If it's just because of that, couldn't Inoue heal it? Chad questioned. Ishida looked at him in surprise, having not thought of that, and looked at Inoue, trying to conceal his hope but failing. Can you, Inoue-san? Inoue smiled brightly at him while rubbing the back of head. I guess I can give it a try. I'll need you to lie down, so I guess we will wait until we get to Urahara-san's unless you want to lie in the middle of the street. No, that's okay, Inoue-san. I can wait until we get to Urahara's. Ichigo awoke to a familiar place, sitting on the side of a tall building, the sky a deep blue with no clouds in. He stood up, always feeling a little bit strange to be able to stand on the sides of buildings. So you've come, Ichigo. Ichigo spun around to see Zangetsu in his usual perch on a flagpole. Old man Zangetsu, you're back. I haven't been able to feel your presence recently. I have been recently battling your inner hollow for control, and for a while he had the upper hand until that glove that Urahara gave you weakened him, which allowed me to take back control. How did it weaken him? Some kid spells, Bakuto to be more precise, have him trapped for now, but it will only hold him back for so long. How much time? That all depends on you, Ichigo. What do you mean? Ichigo asked, confused, as Zangetsu jumped off his flagpole and walked towards him. Ichigo, what happens when a Shinigami loses their resolve? Ichigo just remained silent as Zangetsu looked at him sternly and fiercely, said, their blade dulls, their Ryatsu weakens, their reflexes slow down, and before you know it they're dead. But it's not like that for you, Ichigo. If your resolve weakens, if you begin to fear your own power, the more power he gets and the more I weaken. Afraid of my power? What do you mean? Why would I fear you? Zangetsu shook his head. Not my power, Ichigo. Your hollow's power is your power. I'm not a hollow. It's not my power. It is your power, Ichigo. Both he and I am your power. We work together as Shinigami and Zanpakuto, but for you to be able to use your hollow powers require a different path. A different path? Cast away your fear, Ichigo. Fight your hollow and show him who is in charge. That is your only option, or be devoured. Only you can fight him. Ichigo looked solemn at Zangetsu's words. You have a week, maybe two, to get strong enough to fight your hollow. The way you are right now, full of doubt, fear, you won't last long against him. Then what will you do, Ichigo? Are you just going to let your hollow self take control and kill everyone that you care for? One final warning, Ichigo. Do not go bankai until you decide to battle your hollow. When in bankai, your Ryatsu rises and this will break the hold on your hollow. To get strong enough. He thought before remembering that he had gone to Urahara's for training and the reason why he was here now. Hey old man, I need to seal you. Seal me? You mean into a measly katana? Ah, yeah, I guess so. Why should I? You asked me to fight together with you. It would be impractical for me to be sealed. You should know why I got my powers in the first place. It's not to fight, to destroy or to rule, but to protect the ones I care about, and having you in a full-time release state is hurting people. Our Ryatsu together is far too strong for normal life. The only time we should be is during battle. Ichigo said to him, expecting an angry retort back, but was surprised to see Zangetsu smiling at him. Very well, Ichigo. I was wondering when you would finally realize the damage you were doing. What? Why didn't you tell me then? Some things you have to work out on your own, Ichigo, besides you never told me to seal myself. Bastard is mocking me. Ichigo growled to himself as his face settled into its natural scowl at the smug look on Zangetsu's face. What's the command to activate Shurikai? Zangetsu frowned at him. You already know it, Ichigo. I do? Ichigo questioned, to which Zangetsu nodded. Remember back to all the battles we have fought together, and you will know. My, isn't this a surprise? Urahara said cheerfully as Ishida, Inoue and Chad descended from the stairs into the training ground and all looked curiously at the meditating Ichigo. Chad walked over to Urahara and Ko, while Ishida lay on the ground and Inoue stood above him and commanded. Soten Kiss-hun, I reject. A half-oval barrier surrounded Ishida as he prayed for Inoue to be successful so he could protect Karakura town alongside his nakama. What is she doing? Yoruichi questioned Chad as they watched Inoue heal Ishida. She is going to try and restore Ishida's powers. Wow! That is amazing, such abilities. Urahara cheered, impressed at Inoue's abilities, and it wasn't too long when Inoue was finished and a very happy Ishida was able to summon the bow he used before going to Soul Society. Thank you very much, Inoue-san, he said before bowing deeply, causing Inoue to blush in embarrassment, while Chad smiled at the sight before glancing over at his best friend. What is Ichigo doing? He is communicating with his zanpakuto in order to seal it so he can begin controlling his own Ryatsu. Controlling his Ryatsu? Kurosaki? Ishida said in astonishment. Ryatsu control was the last thing he would ever expect Ichigo to ever practice in. Doesn't Kurosaki-kun hate this type of training? How did you get him to do it? Kisuke just pointed out some hard facts to him, and he went along with it. What made Ichigo decide to train instead continue his normal life? He is worried about Aizen, Urahara told them. Why? Isn't that Soul Society's problem? What would Aizen want with Karakura town? Ishida questioned as Urahara turned serious and told them softly. I have my suspicions. I just seriously hope I am wrong. What are your suspicions? Chad questioned. Urahara just smiled at him before pointing at the awakening Ichigo. I'll tell you if I am right. Ichigo stood up, and then focused his Ryatsu into Zangetsu before there was small flash before everyone's sweat dropped at the sight, including Ichigo. The katana in his hand was an almost exact replica of the one he had when Rukia lent him her powers, the same handle, shape, and to his embarrassment the size. The major difference was that the top half of the blade was black and it had a silver edge. It was the katana version of his Shurikai. He could hear laughter from behind him. He turned to look and saw Yoruichi with a big smirk on her face. Tensa was able to keep a straight face, and Ishida, Inoue, and Chad were just giving him pitying looks. Urahara's reaction pissed Ichigo off though. He was rolling on the ground laughing his head off as a tick mark appeared on Ichigo's forehead. Hey you bastard, what is so funny? Sorry, it's just I've never seen a Shurikai be sealed in such a large sword. The only real difference is that it now has a hilt. While Urahara continued laughing much to Ichigo's frustration, Yoruichi decided to intervene. Ichigo, can you release your Shurikai? Ichigo stopped glaring at Urahara to glance at Yoruichi before he looked at his katana and closed his eyes and allowed memories to flow through his mind. If you really were stronger than I was, what would have been the point of running away when you would have caught up to me anyways? However, if you are just a weakling, I can simply kick your ass and then move forward promptly. If I am dodging, I won't let him cut me. If I am protecting someone, I won't let her die. If I am attacking, I will cut you. It's meaningless to just live. It's meaningless to just fight. I want to win. If only to stop that rain, I will lend you any strength. Our pride, you said? Therefore, that pride you're saying to be so precious is somehow connected with killing Rukia. Is it? Then I should stomp on it as you said. 'Cause that's why I obtained this bankai. That's my line. Thank you, Rukia. Thanks to you, it seems the rain has finally stopped. Yeah. Ichigo told her before lifting his katana straight into the air. He began leaking out a large amount of ryatsu and commanded, "Stop the rain, Zangetsu." Ichigo swung his katana towards the ground, however as it came down the blade had changed, for it was now covered in a cloth before it unraveling to reveal Zangetsu in all his glory. After marveling at his work for a few moments, Ichigo resealed it before realization sunk in that Ishida, Chad, and Inoue were here instead of school. Hey, what are you guys doing here? Ishida scoffed at him. We could ask you that same question, Kurosaki. I have to get stronger, strong enough to protect everyone from Aizen. Can I receive training from you as well, Urahara-san? Chad asked him, which earned him a surprising glance from the man. Sato-kun? Inoue said, but Chad ignored her and continued. Back at Soul Society I couldn't even touch a captain, I need to get a lot stronger. If anything, Sato-san, your major weakness is speed, is that correct? At Chad's nod, Urahara continued, so it might be best if Yorichi trains you. Yorichi nodded with a smirk. Don't worry, Sato, I'll make you as fast as Ichigo's bankai when I'm done with you. Yorichi took Chad to another part of the training field, while Urahara asked both Ishida and Inoue if they were here for training. No, only one person can help me advance further. Ishida sighed. Moments before he was about to depart, Urahara spoke up. Ishida-san, there is something I have been meaning to give you, a little side project I have been working on for the last 50 years. He handed him 2 pairs of gloves. Both were white with a blue quincy cross on each one. Ishida inspected the gloves before questioning, what are they for? One pair is for you, and another is for the person that is going to train you. The purpose that these gloves is to alter the racial that you gather, and when you use your abilities, it won't kill but purify them and send them to Soul Society. Ishida looked at him with wide eyes as his glasses fell down his nose. Are you serious? Yep. Urahara said cheerfully. It was a pain to do and it took a long time, but I eventually created a seal that was able to alter the racial. Now you won't have to worry about Soul Society breathing down your neck. Thank you, Urahara-san. It's no problem. I just wish that somebody was able to invent this seal before the incident. Ishida soon departed after many thanks that made Urahara's chest puff out after each one. Before Urahara turned to Inoue, what about you, Inoue-san? I'm sorry, but I have to meet Tatsuki-chan later and I have homework to do. I have to keep my grades up or my aunt will send me less money. Very well, Inoue-san. Inoue bid her farewells before leaving while Ichigo looked on before asking Urahara, what was the point of Ishida and Inoue coming if they just left? Who knows? But I think it's best that Inoue-san keeps her abilities low profile. Urahara told him as he turned his attention to him only to be hit in the face by a glove, realizing that it was the glove that he had given Ichigo not too long ago. Ah, Kurosaki-san, what are you doing? This glove was the only thing holding your hollow back. Yeah, I know. I am going to fight for control now. Why now? Why not get stronger and then fight him? No, Zangetsu says the only thing that is weakening me is my resolve. I'm going to fight him now and I am going to win. That's all there is to it. Urahara sighed before nodding in acceptance. Wait a second before you fight, Kurosaki-san. Ichigo nodded as Urahara quickly exited the training ground, and it was 5 minutes later holding a large container, much to Ichigo's curiosity. Okay, Kurosaki-san, please stab Zangetsu through this container. Why? It will drain you all of your ryatsu to the point of unconsciousness. From there you will awaken your inner world where you can fight your hollow. Why do I have to do this? It's more for our sake, actually. What do you mean? What do you think happens to your body when you are in your fighting your hollow? Ichigo just looked confused. Lie on the ground peacefully until I win. Urahara's sweat dropped. No, you begin to turn into a hollow. If you don't beat your hollow in time, you will become one. So by draining your ryatsu before the battle, it will be easier to fight against. But I need my ryatsu to fight my hollow. Urahara smirked at him. You will be fighting in your inner world like I have said, and you don't run out of ryatsu there. How can you run out of ryatsu when you're fighting inside of your soul? I would have thought even you would have known that. Shut up, you bastard. I hope my hollow hurts you for that comment. Urahara chuckled as Ichigo stabbed Zangetsu through the container, and felt his Ryatsu being sucked out at a rapid pace. It took 10 minutes, however, for Ichigo's reserves to be depleted as Zangetsu resealed himself as Ichigo finally lost consciousness. Urahara smiled at the full container of Ichigo's Ryatsu, before moving it and placing it in a barrier so it wasn't damaged in the fight, as it would play a vital role later on. Tensa, would you please seal Ichigo in place? It should be difficult for him to break out of a very high-level Bakuto. Bakuto 63 Seijo Sabaku. A yellow energy rope that looks like thick chains appeared out of mid-air and wrapped tightly around Ichigo's torso. Bakuto 99 Kin. Spiritual fabric wrapped around Ichigo's entire body on top of the Bakuto 63 and pinned his body firmly on the ground with spiritual fabric stacked to the ground around Ichigo, with several iron shafts in an X shape. Bakuto 75 Gochu Tekken. 5 incredibly tall and thick pillars, which were connected to each other by chains, were summoned in mid-air above Ichigo before landing right on top of him. 1 on each leg, 1 on each shoulder blade, and 1 smack in the middle of his back. Excellent work, Tensa, as usual. That should hold him. Tensa nodded, breathing slightly heavy, but couldn't help ask, "Are you sure?" "Yeah, if Ichigo hadn't depleted his Ryatsu beforehand then he would break out, but it shouldn't be a problem now. Could you inform Yoruichi and Chad to stay clear of this area until we are done, just in case?" Tensa nodded before heading in the direction that Yoruichi was as Urahara looked back at Ichigo, whose Ryatsu had spiked, but it wasn't his normal Ryatsu, it was much darker. Ichigo's eyes awoken with him standing back in a place that he had been not too long ago, but this time he saw a white figure crouching on the spot where Zangetsu usually perched. The figure lifted his head and Ichigo recognized him to be the one that he had fought back in Soul Society during his battle with Kenpachi. His white look-alike had a big wicked grin on his face. "Yo Ichigo, it's been a while. So you're my inner hollow, huh? I knew that there was something strange about you when we first met back at Soul Society." "Ha, well, aren't you clever? But I have to say, Ichigo, that you have surprised me a lot lately." "What do you mean?" "Well, first of all, instead of going to school and trying to get back to a normal life, making your blade dull like I expected you to. Instead you went straight to that shopkeeper's and asked for more training, didn't know you had it in ya, Ichigo, and second of all, you actually learned how to seal Zangetsu," he said, indicating to the sealed blade on his back, which Ichigo noticed. "How long have you known how to seal Zangetsu?" "The same amount as you, Ichigo. I learn what you learn. Why do you think I am so impressed? I never even thought about sealing him. The final thing that has impressed me, Ichigo, is that I sense no fear in you right now. Just last night I could feel your fear of me and that you had a chance thanks to that damn glove to stay in control peacefully for at least another week. Yet here you are, disposing of that glove only a few minutes of putting it on. I didn't realize that you were so eager to fight me. I guess that chat with Zangetsu really helped you prepare for this fight." Zangetsu said that you and he were fighting for control, but he didn't elaborate on it. "How did you get strong enough to overthrow him?" Ichigo tilted his head to the right as he stared at Ichigo before smirking. "Zangetsu and I have always been one and the same. Both Zangetsu and I are a part of your spiritual power, and I was a part of Zangetsu. We all share the same body, and whenever the dominant person changes, the outer appearance changes. When one is dominated by life, one is flesh. When one is dominated by death, one becomes bones. It's the same reasoning. My power expanded, and so the ruling power went to me. In addition, this way, Zangetsu became a part of me instead. The more you try to use Zangetsu's power, the easier it is for me to control your soul. That is why you are here, Ichigo, to fight me so that Zangetsu can regain control. I am stronger than Zangetsu, however, if you are able to defeat me, then you gain control over my power. I see that also means that Zangetsu will become the dominant one, won't he?" "Yeah, that is right. You will have beaten me in battle, proving that you are the stronger one, and after that I would have to battle against yours and Zangetsu's power, which would be an impossible task." Ichigo narrowed his eyes at him. "You have been surprisingly forthcoming with information." Ichigo laughed hard at him before he taunted him by saying, "Of course I am, Ichigo. After all, this is going to be the last time you are going to have a chance to ask questions before I devour you." "You wish," Ichigo told him before drawing his katana, as did Ichigo, who immediately jumped into the air. "Now, Ichigo, let's find out who is stronger." Ichigo swung his blade downwards, aiming for Ichigo's head, but Ichigo stopped it in its tracks with his before pushing back, the force making Ichigo land on the side of the building with a grin on his face. Ichigo used Shunpa to appear behind Ichigo, and swung his blade to the right side of Ichigo's neck but was calmly parried away before he swung his sword at Ichigo's left shoulder, but Ichigo just managed to get a desperate swipe to deflect it. Ichigo leapt back to put some distance between them so he could think of a plan when all of a sudden, Ichigo was directly in front of him aiming for his head, but he ducked under the swing and slashed at Ichigo's legs. Unfortunately for him, Ichigo jumped over him and landed behind him before attacking his unguarded back, but Ichigo used Shunpa to dodge and appeared a few meters away from Ichigo. Not bad, Ichigo. Shut up, I don't need compliments from you. Ichigo snapped at him, panting slightly. He found it hard to follow his movements. There were a few times there where he was just able to defend. Don't be so grumpy and tense, Ichigo. Let's have some fun. Ichigo just scowled at him. He hated that smirk on his face. He didn't smile or smirk often, it wasn't natural on his face, and this bastard was flaunting it. He raised his katana in the air and let a burst of ryatsu, drawing a raised eyebrow from Ichigo before he shouted out, "Stop the rain, Zangetsu." Ichigo swung his sword down, creating an explosion as the force of the ryatsu that was swung created a crater in the building. So getting serious, Ichigo? Fine, then I guess there is no point in dragging this out, Ichigo said as he copied Ichigo's dance, but instead of saying the same release phase as Ichigo, he said, "Let the rain fall, Zangetsu." Ichigo's eyes widened at the phrase as he saw Ichigo holding a reverse color Zangetsu. So instead of having a black blade with a silver edge, it was a silver blade with a black edge. In addition, the cloth on Ichigo's was black instead of white, but that didn't matter to him, for there was something else that piqued Ichigo's curiosity. Why was your command phrase different to mine? I am your hollow powers and Zangetsu is your Shinigami powers. Your Shinigami powers are at your strongest when you are confident, happy, and all of those other positive emotions. Those emotions create clear skies and sunlight in your inner world, which Zangetsu loves and thus able to lend you more of his power. That is why your release is "Stop the rain," as Zangetsu hates the rain, and would do anything to make it stop. However, I am the opposite of Zangetsu. When it rains, that means that you're feeling negative emotions such as anger, sorrow, despair, and others like that. The rain causes Zangetsu's power to weaken and mine to grow, and that is why my release is called that. Who are you? How did you become part of Zangetsu? Why is it that no other Shinigami has an inner hollow but I do? Is it because of what happened in the shattered shaft? Ichigo lost the smirk that was on his face as his face grew serious, and Ichigo wondered if he maybe hit a sore spot with his questions. You are not like any other Shinigami, Ichigo. Zangetsu has always been with you since the moment you were born, and you had Ryatsu the day you were born. In the first 9 years of your life, your Ryatsu grew as did Zangetsu's power until the day your mother died. Ichigo flinched at the mention of his mother's death. Even after hearing the projection of her thoughts before she died, still couldn't remove the guilt in his heart. That day, Ichigo, was the day that I was born. Ichigo's eyes widened at that. Shocks you, doesn't it, Ichigo? I became all that guilt, sorrow, despair, and anger that you were feeling deep inside. If it wasn't for your humanity, you would have turned into a hollow then, as Zangetsu's power had almost drowned in your sorrow. Soon, however, you were able to start feeling those other positive emotions thanks to your father and sisters. Your urge to protect them and your friends strengthened Zangetsu. Do you understand yet, Ichigo? I am not the opposite of Zangetsu. I am your opposite, all of the dark emotions in your soul, and now we are both fighting for the right of control over Zangetsu and our soul. Ichigo just looked at him speechless. His eyes widened in shock as the revelation of his hollow powers were born. Ichigo vanished before reappearing on Ichigo's right, whose instinct snapped him out of his stupor, and he was able to block the attack from Ichigo. Both were locked onto a tight sword lock, both trying to overpower the other before Ichigo was forced to break it and jumped backwards. As Ichigo prepared for his next attack, Ichigo began spinning his Zangetsu in a circle with the cloth as he did back in Soul Society, but this time Ichigo was ready for it. His eyes glowed blue for a second as he watched the incoming sword that Ichigo had thrown towards him. Holding his Zangetsu in his right hand, he swung it across his body and batted the incoming sword away. Ichigo, after a split second of surprise, pulled his Zangetsu back towards him, but Ichigo already anticipated this as the edge of Zangetsu glowed blue before he swung it up diagonally to the right. Getsuga Tensho. The shape of blue Ryatsu that exploded out of Zangetsu was a crescent moon as it tore up the building underneath as shot towards a surprised Ichigo. However, he was able to grab onto Zangetsu quick enough to use it to block the attack as it threatened to overwhelm him, but just as he was about to gain the upper hand, something behind him caught his attention. To his shock, there was Ichigo, who had used Shunpa when he was busy holding back the Getsuga to get behind him. He was holding Zangetsu with 2 hands with them raised above his head before he swung it down. Getsuga Tensho. This blast hit him straight in the back, knocking him completely off balance, which allowed the first one to him, causing a big explosion of Ryatsu. Ichigo was panting after that attack before taking a deep breath to regain his composure. He smirked at the explosion and muttered, "How did you like that, you cocky bastard?" A figure suddenly shot out of the smoke and Ichigo saw that it was Ichigo, whose top half of clothes had big rips in it. He had bruising all over his upper body and blood coming down his right eye, but he still had a giant smirk on his face. "That was a nice move, Ichigo. Here, try mine, Getsuga Tensho." He swung his Zangetsu down as white mixed with red Ryatsu burst out of the sword, and like Ichigo's it shot in the shape of a crescent moon. Ichigo just was able to shunpa out of the way as the Getsuga crashed into the building as smoke and rubble filled the air, but to Ichigo's surprise, Ichigo's Zangetsu came flying out of the smoke straight at him. He wasn't able to dodge out of the way completely, as Zangetsu sliced through the top of his left shoulder, making blood spurt out, and Ichigo flinched in pain. Zangetsu flew back to Ichigo, who walked out of the smoke before placing Zangetsu on his right shoulder. "Like that surprise, Ichigo? I've had better." "TSK, what are we doing, Ichigo? We both know that no one is going to win just by using Shurikai. I like a good fight, but we are both just wasting time fighting with Shurikai. Let's go all out." Ichigo pointed Zangetsu directly out in front of him, Zangetsu in his right hand while his left was on his right bicep and Zangetsu's cloth was wrapped around his right arm. Ichigo, realizing what he was doing, copied the stance as they both surrounded by their Ryatsu, Ichigo's blue and Ichigo's white and red. "Bankai!" They both yelled before their Ryatsu exploded, and as dust settled, Ichigo's robe was replaced with a long-sleeved, ankle-length black coat. From his ankles to his waist he was still wearing the same piece of clothing. The inside of the coat was red while the coat ends were white and ragged. Zangetsu had become a dado with a black blade. The cross guard has 4 prongs bent out to form the shape of the manji, and instead of the cloth his shurikai form had a short length of chain with a broken link at the end dangles from the base of the hilt. Ichigo was in the same getup, but again the color was reversed. Where there was black on Ichigo there was white on Ichigo. The only difference was that instead of having red in the inside of Ichigo's robe it was black. "Now this is better, isn't it? I'd feel a lot better with this sword in your chest." Ichigo let out a maniacal laugh. "What's wrong, Ichigo? I get the feeling you don't like me." "Shut up," Ichigo said before charging him much faster than earlier thanks to the increased speed of his bankai, as he swung his sword downward with 2 hands to slice Ichigo's head. However, Ichigo raised his sword to block it with only one hand on, with a smirk on his face as Ichigo's face formed a scowl, but a bright light caught his attention. In Ichigo's left hand a ball of white Ryatsu with a red edge was forming. Ichigo's face changed to realization followed by horror as Ichigo's smirk widened. "Zero!" That small ball of Ryatsu changed into a big beam which Ichigo didn't have the time to dodge and was caught in the beam, which blasted into a skyscraper. Ichigo got up painfully, blood coming down the left side of his forehead, while part of his coat on his left shoulder was blasted off. Ichigo glared at Ichigo, who was chuckling at the look on his face. "You can use Zero?" "Obviously." Ichigo just continued to glare at him, which was starting to get on his nerves. "What? It's not my fault that you don't know any other moves except for Getsuga. Maybe instead of rushing into fighting me you should have learned some Kido in preparation." "What good would it have done? Didn't you say that you learned what I learn? Any Kido that I would have learned, you would have as well." "You really are a dumbass, Ichigo. Anything that you learn from Zangetsu I learn. Outside of that, whatever you learn are yours and yours alone. I am a hollow, I can't learn Kido." Ichigo mocked him before firing another Zero, which Ichigo dodged with Shunpa successfully. However, Ichigo just kept firing Zero one after another, but Ichigo was able to dodge all of them. Ichigo decided that he had gotten bored of standing there and just firing Zero, so he charged towards Ichigo intending to cut him in half. But Ichigo flash stepped behind him and swung at Ichigo's unprotected back. However, Ichigo had anticipated that Ichigo would do this and had his left hand's index finger pointing at Ichigo underneath his right arm, preparing a Zero. Ichigo's swing connected with the Zero as he struggled to overpower it until he heard the sound of another Zero being prepared. His eyes widened as he saw Ichigo now standing behind him, a Zero preparing in his hand. Payback is a bitch, Ichigo. He fired the Zero as Ichigo quickly unleashed a Getsuga that cut through the Zero he was blocking before using Shunpa up into the air to dodge the Zero. However, a voice whispered behind him. Too slow. Ichigo spun around only for Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu slashed through his right pec and shoulder, and then he swung again, this time at Ichigo's head. Ichigo, through the pain, was able to block the attack but knew that Ichigo had all of the momentum, so he kicked him with his right foot into his left hip, unknowingly that he instinctively focused a large amount of Ryatsu into his foot. Ichigo coughed up blood as Ichigo's foot sank into his hip before he was sent flying into a building, while Ichigo gathered his composure in mid-air and prepared for Ichigo's counterattack. Ichigo stood up in the crater that he had made from the impact, holding his left hip, glaring slightly at Ichigo. He didn't know that he kicked that hard. He knew that he couldn't, and that really pissed him off. He stepped up a few meters off where Ichigo was, who was looking at him apprehensively, but he just grinned at him. That was a nice kick, Ichigo. I have to admit that not even I can kick that hard. Ichigo smirked at him. Admitting you're weak, huh? I've yet to show you what I am truly capable of. Ichigo's face grew serious before smirking lightly, which stunned Ichigo. Usually they were taunting smirks, or maniacal, but this time Ichigo saw nothing but pure confidence. It made him feel uneasy. Yes, you have. Seeing Ichigo's confused expression, he told him, you are giving it all you have got, Ichigo. I'll admit that with Zangetsu sealed and in his Shurikai form that we are pretty even, but in Bankai there is a big gap between us. You don't know how to use Bankai, Ichigo. Watch, you will not be able to hit me again. We'll see, you cocky bastard. Ichigo charged at him and swiped at his chest but was parried, then attempted to cut his head, but once again, it was blocked. Neck, shoulders, legs, arms, chest, back, head, no matter where he attacked, Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu would always block it, and Ichigo would not lose that confident grin on his face. It made Ichigo's blood boil, but it made no difference. No matter how fast his attacks were or how powerful, he couldn't break Ichigo's defense. Eventually, after several minutes of continuous attacks and parries, Ichigo finally put some distance between them. Ichigo was looking smug while Ichigo was panting heavily. Like I told you, Ichigo, you don't know how to use Bankai. Shut up. Ichigo snapped at him before gathering Ryatsu into Tensa Zangetsu as black Ryatsu with a red edge surrounded the blade before he slashed it towards Ichigo. Getsuga Tensho. The black and red Getsuga shot towards Ichigo, who actually looked gleeful before he batted the attack away with one hand, much to Ichigo's shock. He shunpoed directly in front of Ichigo and aimed a cut downward for his head, but Ichigo raised his to meet it, but that was what Ichigo wanted before he placed a hand on the edge of his blade and whispered. Getsuga Tensho. Ichigo was blown up in an explosion of white and red Ryatsu that also destroyed the building that was not far behind Ichigo. Ichigo smirked when he saw Ichigo rise above from the rubble. Moments later, a deep slash on his stomach, blood dripping down from it, the front of his coat blasted off. I told you, didn't I? Have you forgotten? I was the first one to use Getsuga Tensho in Bankai. All you did was watch my battle, and then try to imitate and failed miserably. To use the Kurwa Getsuga Tensho requires a certain ingredients that you haven't got. Do you know what they are? Ichigo glared at Ichigo. His Getsuga Tensho was useless now. He couldn't beat him in a clash with swords, unable to overwhelm him with Ryatsu, and Ichigo could use Zero. The only thing that had worked since they went Bankai was that kick he got on him, but even he was surprised by the power behind it. He didn't have a clue on how he did it. All of a sudden, a drop of rain fell onto his nose. Before he looked up, and the clear blue sky were now filled with dark clouds. Noticing what Ichigo was looking at, Ichigo spoke up. You know what this means now, don't you, Ichigo? Ichigo looked fiercely at him before holding Tensa Zangetsu out in front of him as he prepared for Ichigo's next attack. Ichigo just sighed and began spinning Tensa Zangetsu on his finger. He was now bored with this fight. Ichigo had nothing left up in his sleeve, and it was time to take his rightful place on the throne. Ichigo, what's the difference between a king and his horse? I don't mean kitty shit like one's a person and one's an animal, or one has 2 legs and one has 4. If their form, ability, and power were the same, why is it that one becomes the king and controls the battle, while the other becomes the horse and carries the king? There's only one answer. Instinct. In order for identical beings to get stronger and gain the power they need to become king, they must search for more battles and power. They thirst for battle, and live to mercilessly crush, shred, and slice their enemies. Deep, deep within our body lies the honed instinct to kill, and slaughter our enemies. However, you don't have that. You don't have those pure, base instincts. You fight with your brain. You try to defeat your enemies with logic, and it doesn't work. You're trying to cut them with a sheathed sword. That's why you're weaker than me, Ichigo. Using Shunpa, he appeared on Ichigo's left and went to cut off his arm, but Ichigo was able to spin around in time to block it, but Ichigo applied more force onto Ichigo's blade, and it snapped in half. Ichigo could only look in shock at his broken sword before he felt a sharp pain pierce his chest, taking his attention away from his sword to the sword that had punctured his chest. I'm not gonna have it, Ichigo. I don't know about Zangetsu, but I refuse to carry a king who's weaker than I am and be cut to ribbons with him. If you're weaker than me, then I'll destroy you, and take your crown for myself. Ichigo's sword slipped out of his hand as rain poured rapidly as the remaining tall buildings began to deteriorate as water began to rise from the bottom of the inner world. Ichigo smirked in triumph before ripping the blade out of Ichigo's chest as he fell into the abyss below. Seeing Ichigo fall towards the abyss brought much joy to him. I am the king! He hit the water hard as he began to sink to the bottom. Or was it just because the water was rising that it made him think he was sinking? He didn't know. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't move an inch of his body, everything was going dark, he had failed. What is the problem, Ichigo? Why have you fallen so? Ichigo's eyes shot open at the voice. It was familiar, but he couldn't remember to whom it belonged. Are you just going to give up and let him control your body? He will hurt your family, your friends, and you are just going to lie there? What else can I do? None of my attacks worked, he had all the answers. That is where you are wrong, Ichigo. What do you mean? You haven't used your power yet. My power? Yes, Ichigo, your power. This whole fight you have only been using the little Zangetsu could give you. Both you and your hollow have each been given 50% of Zangetsu's power, but unlike you, he has used his own alongside. You're wrong, I have been giving it everything I have got, but I can't win. Explain to me then, why your Ryatsu is only at vice captain level then. My Ryatsu has been the same as always. If anything, it's because I'm only using 50% of Zangetsu's power. Fool, the voice roared, startling him. Whatever patience or calmness in the voice was no gone, it had become cold and chilling. Before you started fighting alongside Zangetsu, your Ryatsu level was low captain, so why has your Ryatsu level this whole fight been at vice captain level? I'll tell you why. When you partnered up with Zangetsu, you became reliant on him. You could no longer do anything without him holding your hand. You were afraid to use your own power so not to anger Zangetsu. Don't you remember how much stronger you became during bankai training? All of your power then was all you. Why do you think your hollow wanted to wait to battle you, hoping that your fear would grow and give him more power because he knew that your power along with Zangetsu's surpassed his? Get up and fight, Ichigo. Fight with the amount of power Zangetsu has given you and add it to your own. Ichigo's eyes glowed slightly blue, but it still wasn't enough to pull him out of the abyss yet. What are you going to do, Ichigo? Yuzu, Karen is going to die, your father is going to die, Rukia is going to die, and your friends are going to die, all because you refused to get up. Ichigo's eyes were now glowing with Ryatsu. One more push and the dam will break. Is this what your mother died for? A little crybaby who refuses to get back up just because he's losing. She left behind her daughters for you to protect, and you're just going to lie there and let her down when she gave you the two most important things in her life. Her daughters and her life. How could you ever look at her again if you don't get up and win now, Ichigo? That did it. The dam broke, and Blue Ryatsu burst from his body and rose out of the water into the sky, shocking a celebrating Ichigo who could only look on in shock. All of a sudden the water stopped rising and a small speck of sunlight breached the clouds as the Ryatsu disappeared, and Ichigo's eyes widened at the sight of Ichigo standing in midair. Ichigo noticed that his eyes were glowing blue, showing that Ichigo was full of nothing but resolve, his Tensa Zangetsu full restored, and that his wounds had stopped bleeding, which he found interesting. Yo, you didn't think it was over yet, did you? Ichigo smirked at him, still not giving up. Ichigo, fine, I guess I'll have to beat it into you some more. Come at me. Ichigo scowled at the confidence Ichigo suddenly had before charging towards him, slashing at his shoulder, but found his blade blocked fiercely. Before, whenever Ichigo blocked him, it felt like being blocked by a dull sword, that if he applied enough force he could cut right through it, which he did eventually. Now, however, it felt like trying to cut through an impenetrable wall. If anything, it felt like his blade was the one that was breaking. Ichigo smirked at him, sensing his astonishment before going on the offensive, the blue Ryatsu in his eyes as he started applying force on Ichigo's blade, which forced Ichigo to break away before his sword snapped. Deciding to keep a distance, he began preparing for a zero while Ichigo just raised his right arm into the air and bending it so his elbow was the highest point and level with his head, while his blade was pointing diagonally across his body facing down. Ichigo had no idea what that stance was but fired the most powerful zero that he could, and as it headed towards Ichigo, who refused to move before it collided with him. As the explosion refuge cleared away, Ichigo stood remaining in the exact same stance without any new damage, much to Ichigo's shock. That impenetrable wall feeling from before wasn't too far off. How? Ichigo asked, but Ichigo just ignored him, raised Tensa's Zangetsu into the air, and gathered his Ryatsu, making the edge of Tensa shine blue. Let's test your Getsuga then. Ichigo stuck his sword out to the right, and gathered his Ryatsu, and moments later the blade was surrounded by white and red Ryatsu. Both Ichigo and Ichigo stared each other down for a moment, as the clouds slowly started disappearing as the clear sky returned. Ichigo slashed his sword down, while Ichigo swung his sword across his body and both shouted, Getsuga Tensho. Both blue and white/red Ryatsu clashed, both battled for dominance before the white/red Ryatsu enveloped the blue and blew up, much to Ichigo's joy. See, you still not have surpassed me, Ichigo. My Getsuga is still stronger. Idiot, a voice whispered behind him, but before he could turn around in time, a hand grabbed the arm that held Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu before it was sliced off. Ichigo dropped the arm as it fell to the ground below, as the water had vanished and the streets had reappeared, as the buildings were growing tall again under the clear blue sky. H. Ichigo screamed in pain at the loss of his arm before he pointed his left arm at Ichigo and prepared a zero, but Ichigo pierced his chest with Tensa Zangetsu right where his heart would be if he were human. Ichigo could only look at the blade piercing him before he fell into resignation that he had lost the battle as his clothes turned black before he started disappearing. Shit. Looks like your instincts, and your desire to fight, aren't completely gone. Guess there's no way around it. You got me. I have to recognize you as the king, for now, but don't you ever forget. Don't forget that either one of us can become the king, or the horse. If you ever give me the chance, I'll drag you down and crush your skull. And one last warning, if you really want to control my power, make sure you don't get yourself killed before I come back. After that final warning by Ichigo, he disappeared right before Ichigo's eyes as he sighed in relief. Finally taking out his hollow was a big relief for him. He looked around and noticed that his inner world was almost as it was before the fight started, but just as he was about to leave, he heard clapping from behind him. He turned around to find a person, who looked roughly about his age, standing on the perch of a building, in a hooded black garment similar to Zangetsu's, but this one had a hood covering his face. Who are you? Ichigo questioned, praying that this wasn't someone else he had to fight. I guess you have never had the chance to know, since you only recently achieved bankai, then immediately had to deal with your hollow, so I guess I can give you the benefit of the doubt. Ichigo's eyes widened as he recognized the voice. It was the voice that had spoken to him when he was sinking into the abyss during his battle. You were the one that was speaking to me earlier, aren't you? Yes, I was. I am quite pleased by your performance afterwards. But you have a long way to go if you want to protect your friends and family from the likes of Aizen. Thanks for the compliment and advice, but you still haven't told me who you are. The young man's hand reached up to his hood before yanking it back, revealing a young man with long black hair that almost reached his shoulders. Even though Ichigo sucked at reading faces, he could recognize it. Zangetsu? Is that you, Zangetsu? No, what is the name of your bankai? He said before a familiar black dato appeared in his right hand. I am Tensa Zangetsu. Urahara watched as the tied-up Ichigo began struggling to break out of the bakuto, but didn't even make a dent before. After a few more minutes, Urahara watched with interest as hollow Ichigo's Ryatsu rise as he activated his Shurikai, but even with the rise of Ryatsu he was still unable to break the bakuto. Looks like you were right, he can't break out. Urahara just smiled cheekily at him before sitting himself on a rock as he watched hollow Ichigo try to break free from the bakuto. 5 minutes later, Urahara felt another shift in hollow Ichigo's Ryatsu as a large burst of black and red Ryatsu exploded from Ichigo. However, to Urahara's astonishment, all of the bakuto that was holding him shattered. Standing before him was Ichigo with 3/4 of his mask covering his face, and his left arm was completely hollowified along with a hole in the middle of his chest surrounded by white armor. He also noticed that in his right hand he held a black dato indicating that Ichigo had gone bankai in his inner world, but Urahara was still stunned by the amount of ryatsu that was being emitted considering that he had been completely drained beforehand. He frowned for a moment. He had never met anyone with this amount of ryatsu. There was much more to Ichigo than he knew, and there is one thing that he hated, and that was not knowing the answer to something. He would get answers later, but right now he had a powerfully berserk Ichigo after him as he pulled his zanpakuto out of his cane and said, "Awaken Beneheim." His zanpakuto took the form of a sleek, medium-sized sword. The grip had a gentle decorative bend that ended at a crimson tassel dangling from the pommel. Instead of a cross guard, there was a U-shaped decoration covering the first 3 or 4 inches of blade, with a flower petal design just as it met a red string wrapping. The string is wrapped thrice around the hilt, with a 3-loop bow on one side and a folded paper decoration on the other. Beneheim's blade was straight and slim, though somewhat short, with the tip ending in a slanted razor-like edge instead of being tapered to a point. Hollow Ichigo charged towards him with high speed, but Urahara could follow the movements no problem as he dodged all of the attacks effortlessly. As Ichigo swung at Urahara's chest, but he easily dodged it by shumpoing behind Ichigo. However, during the Shuinpa he slashed Ichigo's right shoulder deeply in order to restrict his swings. Unfortunately for him, a white substance instantly covered up the wound, making Urahara mentally swear as he prepared for Ichigo's next attack. Ichigo's sword became surrounded with black and red ryatsu before firing the Getsuga at Urahara, who just looked on calmly before pointing Beneheim at the incoming wave. Chikosumi no Tate. A crimson hexagonal-shaped barrier appeared in front of Urahara, blocking him from the impact of the Getsuga as it tried to overpower his shield. Shred Beneheim. Small crimson bullets shot from the shield and ripped apart the Getsuga Tensho, only to see Ichigo swinging his sword into the shield. A crack formed in the shield, much to Urahara's shock, before he was forced to Shuinpa away, releasing the shield before holding his hound out, and chanted, Bakudo 61, Rikujikoro. 6 thin, wide beams of light that slam into Ichigo's midsection, holding him in place before Urahara quickly leaped into the air and fell straight towards Ichigo, and commanded, Shibari, Beneheim. The ryatsu generated by Beneheim condensed into the form of a tangible blood-red net, generated from the blade length, and appeared elongated and somewhat narrow. With a simple slashing motion from Beneheim, it was thrown over the struggling Ichigo. The net further bound and restricted Ichigo by constricting him. Urahara then stabbed the net with the tip of Beneheim and whispered, Hyasobi, Beneheim, Juzutsuneji. Orbs of fire were created along the outside length of the net, which explode like linked landmines in a domino formation leading toward Ichigo. When the orbs came into direct contact with him, it created a tremendously large and devastating explosion. Urahara looked on at the explosion, hoping that he hadn't gone too far, but to his surprise he saw Ichigo unharmed, no doubt to more instant regeneration, but now the white substance had grown around his legs as well. After more dodging, blocking and hitting with his own attacks, Urahara was starting to get a little bit tired as the hollow was constantly pressing with his attacks. It didn't have any brains, but it was strong and quick. Soon Ichigo had almost become a full hollow. His mask resembles a human skull, complete with a jaw joint and rounded forehead, and had dark red stripes on the left side. It looked like a white humanoid lizard with 3-toed feet, and a tail with black marks all over its noticeably more muscular body. It possessed long orange hair and reptilian eyes seen through the eye holes on its full mask, along with a long tail. Urahara was now contemplating now to go in for a killing blow, when Ichigo pointed to claw-like fingers at him and began forming a Siro. He prepared to counter with his Nake Beneheim when his left shoulder broke and blood spurted out. Ichigo's eyes widened before he screamed in pain and exploded in a mixture of blue, black and red ryatsu. After the explosion subsided, all of the hollow form fell apart, leaving Ichigo standing there with a mask on his face and his bankai, which was in tatters, along with his wounds from the fight with his inner hollow. Soon his mask broke away before he fell onto the ground just as Yoruichi and Chad arrived on the scene to see what the commotion was about. Ichigo! Chad shouted out in concern at his friend's state, and was about to rush over to him, but Urahara's arm cut him off. Urahara-san? He is still in his bankai state, which means that his life isn't in jeopardy. If he loses his bankai state, means that he is dying, but since this isn't the case, he must still be in his inner world. Your Tensa Zangetsu? Ichigo asked the younger-looking version of Zangetsu. Yes, I am. When you battled Zangetsu and subdued him, you were given the right to activate bankai, but I am the one that decides to give your bankai power. Tensa explained to him, while twirling his sword on his finger similar to what his hollow was doing earlier. Give my bankai power? Haven't I been using bankai this whole time? Ichigo questioned, but Tensa just shook his head and told him. No, the power that you have been using is just your Ryatsu being condensed, which drastically increased your speed and power. When you activated bankai, I never got the chance to introduce myself to you, as your hollow also learned bankai and used his new power-up to try and overthrow Zangetsu. So my hollow doesn't know you either? He does now because you know, but before then no, he didn't. So are you going to lend me your power? Are we going to fight together? Tensa just smirked at him before shaking his head. Of course not, Ichigo. I have no intention of just giving you my power. Ichigo's eyes widened and asked him. Why not? Zangetsu scolded me because I didn't use his power. I thought I told you, I am not Zangetsu. I am Tensa Zangetsu. I'm not like Zangetsu. I am not going to hold your hand when you fight, and you have to prove to me, Ichigo, that you deserve to wield my power. How do I prove it to you? Do I have to fight and defeat you? He asked him while tensing his sword, preparing for another fight. Tensa chuckled before his sword vanished before him and told Ichigo. If we do fight, Ichigo, how do you think you would be able to fight me in the condition that you are in? Just because you don't run out of Ryatsu here doesn't mean that you're invincible. Every injury you take here reflects onto your outside body. You die here and you die. It's as simple as that, Ichigo. Also, do you remember what had happened at Soul Society with your fight with Byakuya? Your body couldn't even handle the stress of your condensed Ryatsu. What do you think is going to happen if you add my power to it, Ichigo? Ichigo looked down at that. He was right about what happened the last time he used bankai, which was one of the reasons why he had been thinking to only use it as a last resort. That is your first step, Ichigo, to be able to use bankai without the pressure crushing your bones. That will be your first step to prove that you are worthy of wielding me. Now be gone, Ichigo, and get stronger. Ichigo woke up a few hours later in a bed, with bandages wrapped around his chest and his sealed katana lying against the wall across the room from him. The door slid open and he saw Tezai walk in, and seeing that Ichigo was awake, he told him. Ah, you are awake then, Kurosaki-san. The manager is waiting for you in the underground training room, and don't worry, the next exercise you will be doing won't be taxing on your body. Ichigo nodded before painfully getting up, picking up his oversized katana and heading towards the training ground, and when he got there he could see Yoruichi lecturing a worn-out Chad. Urahara was standing on a boulder overseeing the training before he noticed Ichigo at the corner of his eye. Kurosaki-san, you are up early than I expected. Did your plan work? Ichigo asked straight to the point. Mostly, it wasn't until you activated your bankai that there was some problems, but your hollow was nothing but a berserker, so it wasn't hard dodging and blocking its attacks. I see, so what are we doing now? We are going to shrink that sword of yours. How do we do that? He asked, glancing at his enormous katana. Urahara lifted a big metal cube block that was lying next to him before telling Ichigo to slash through it as hard as he could while in its sealed state. Ichigo withdrew his sword before slashing down at the upright block as hard as he could, but only managed to cut it halfway. Now when you are done shrinking your sword, you are going to cut it again. Ichigo nodded before Urahara told him how to do this. First get into the Jinzen position, then I want you to picture your katana just how it is, and then focus all of your Ryatsu to surround the blade. Ichigo once again got into that Jinzen position and began picturing his katana, and then focus his Ryatsu to surround it just as Urahara spoke up again. Now I want you to pour all of your Ryatsu into your katana. Do not stop until it's all in, no matter how long it takes. He began pouring all of that Ryatsu into his sword, but no matter how much he put in, there was always some Ryatsu to replace it, and finally after a few hours he was able to hold all of his Ryatsu in without any leaking out. Once that is done, force your sword to take a thinner shape. It all comes down to your will. It has to suppress your Ryatsu. Is what Urahara told him 30 minutes after he had began this exercise, as he got sick of just waiting for him to finish. Once finished, his katana's blade was glowing blue, and he tried to will it to a smaller blade, but as he tried his focus on condensing it, he lost control of containing it, and his sword exploded in Ryatsu. Looks like that is going to take you a while, Kurosaki-san, Urahara said in amusement, while Ichigo just glared at him before taking a look at his surroundings and saw some of the ground had been destroyed by his Ryatsu. He sighed before getting back in Jinzen and tried again. It had been 1 p.m. in the afternoon when he started this exercise, and by 6 p.m. he was. The sword shrunk and shrunk until it was the size of his bankai blade. Now all he had to do was holding it there for how long he didn't know, when he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest, like he was punched. Opening his eyes and glaring at the shopkeeper before realizing that he had lost focus and that there was no explosion of Ryatsu, and he glanced at his sword to see it was a regular size katana now. Seeing his surprised look, Urahara quickly explained. When you got it down to a regular size, I quickly put a seal onto so it would keep it there. Now I want you to cut that metal again. Setting the metal cube down in front of Ichigo, he once again attempted to slice through it, and this time he cut through the whole thing with ease, like it was butter. Before, when you had that big sword, you had no Ryatsu pumping through it, so when you attacked hollows you struggled to cut through their hierro, and it was at times you had instinctively poured Ryatsu through your sword you cut them. I see, so we can just keep this seal over me and everything's good, right? Wrong, because it's not you that is controlling the suppressed Ryatsu. It could damage your body, so for a few hours each day, I will take the seal off and you will manually have to learn to control it. We will do that every day until you can walk, eat, sleep or fight without losing control of it. Now go home for tonight, you have a big day tomorrow. Part of the training I have for you is going to be a real struggle. Thanks, Urahara-san. After receiving a punch from his father for being late, which he gladly returned, pounding his father into the ground before enjoying a peaceful meal that Yuzu cooked him, he went upstairs to bed. However, before he could get changed and settle in, there was a knock on his door. Ichi and I am coming in. Ichigo looked at his sister Karen enter his room with a solemn look on her face, and she asked him, I want you to tell me, Ichi and I know you are a Shinigami. Whatever Ichigo was expecting to talk about her, this was certainly last on his list. What are you talking about, Karen? I am not a Shin. Don't lie to me. She told him angrily. I have seen those monsters, and I saw you in a black outfit with a giant sword that day we went to Mom's grave. I also remember the night when we were attacked. At first I thought that it was a hit and run like Dad and Yuzu, but it soon all came back to me. Then there was the time with Kananji when I helped him defeat one of those monsters, and he told me that you would be proud. Ichigo just looked at Karen in shock, having not realized what she had been dealing with before looking down slightly. He felt ashamed that he hadn't figured out what she was going through. He explained to her how Rukia had saved his life by giving him her Shinigami powers, and then told her about his duties as a Shinigami. He also explained what happened that day at their mom's grave, and how she was killed by a hollow, and the memory of her thoughts before she died. He then told her about Rukia being taken captive to Soul Society, and his adventures in Soul Society before he finished up with what he had done that day. There was one thing that had changed Karen immensely after their mom's death, and that she was no longer an affectionate person, keeping people at an arm's length just like him, so he was quite surprised when she hugged him tightly. I want to help you, Ichi and I. No, you are too young, Karen, you're only 11 years old. He told her sternly, finally breaking the hug, but she was as stubborn as him. But Ichi. No, I'll take you to Urahara's tomorrow, and you can see me fight in a spar before school just so you can see how dangerous this is. Karen nodded and left the room as Ichigo finally went to bed, hoping for a decent sleep, so he set his alarm to 7 in the morning. At 7 a.m. on the dot, Ichigo's alarm went off. Ai Kuchigaga. Kan yelled as he jumped on Ichigo's chest and began hitting his face with his paws while yelling at him. Get up, Ichigo. Today's a great day to go pick out some babes. Make sure you take me along, as the ladies will be like Okurosaki-kun. You carry around a plushie that is so adorable, I just want to rub it against my chest. Isn't that exciting, Ichigo? Ichigo grabbed him before throwing him into the closet door, causing him to groan in pain as Ichigo rubbed the sleep out of his eye before getting up and grabbing his gear and went to the bathroom for a shower. After telling his dad that he was taking Karen with him this morning and she would go to school later, which Ishin agreed since Ichigo didn't do this type of things for his sister. Urahara was quite surprised to see Karen with him, but after telling him why she was here he understood and agreed to go out in a spar with him. Karen watched as Ichigo sparred, either really going all out, but to see her brother take damage she began to worry. They soon, however, finished up. Neither had more than a few small cuts and bruises. Ichigo told her that was only a light spar, while Urahara lifted his hand out facing a big boulder and said, Hado 31, Shikaho. He fired a ball of red energy towards the boulder and completely destroyed it, much to the shock of Karen. Something like this is child's play. Do you see what type of power you have to fight against Karen? Unlike what you just saw with Urahara-san and I, the enemy will try to kill you. Karen just looked at the ground while Ichigo put his hand on top of her head, much to her surprise. You are my little sister Karen. I will always protect you along with Yuzu, but when you are my age and you still want to, then I will help you, but we will be using the longer, more risk-free route than my high-risk quick route. Thanks Ichi and I, she beamed at him before Ichigo took her to school and then returned, taking out a few hollows on the way. Ichigo wasn't surprised to see Chad there again working on his speed with Yoruichi before he asked Urahara what they were doing today. Well, I was planning on teaching you how to sense other people's ryatsu. I had a long route plan, but when you talked about your high-risk quick route got me thinking. I can teach you in a hurry, but it will be hard and painful, or we can take that slow and painless way. The quick way. I don't have time to take the long routes, Ichigo told him with a smirk. Okay, then say Seo release and then go bankai, Urahara told him seriously while drawing his sword from the cane and releasing it. Ichigo pulled out his sword and said Seo release. His ryatsu burst forth and all of a sudden his sword was back into its giant state, before he focused his ryatsu and yelled out. Bankai! Once the dust cleared, it revealed him with his bankai clothes and his Tensa Zangetsu. Why did you want me to go bankai? Because it is your highest point in power apart from your holification, but we will get to that later. You are at your highest point in ryatsu, so if you can tune out from sensing your own in bankai, you will be able to sense it easily in your sealed state. So how do I do this then? Just don't blink was the reply, and when Ichigo was about to ask what he meant, all of a sudden his eyes were slashed, causing to yell in pain. His face screwed up with pain, his free hand trying to rub the blood away unsuccessfully as it kept trickling down his face before he shouted at Urahara. What the hell are you doing? Teaching you how to sense ryatsu. If we went the long way, I would have had you sit down and try to sense the people around you, which would have taken a long time for you to get past sensing your own because it's so big. So by blinding you, I will force you to have to sense ryatsu, he told the blinded boy, simply like it was obvious. So give me a blindfold, don't cut my eyes. You could just take that blindfold off when you were in real danger. How would that help? I told you beforehand that it was going to be painful. Now are we ready to begin? Fine, you bastard, bring it on. Ichigo growled at him before firing a Getsuga Tensho in the direction of the voice, but Urahara calmly shunpoed out of the way before appearing behind Ichigo, kicking him in the left side of his waist. Ichigo had no idea if his Getsuga hit until he felt a foot in his waist indicating that he hadn't and was sent flying along the ground. He quickly got back up, but suddenly his right cheek was punched and was sent back into the ground. He got back up only to be kicked in the stomach and punched again, only this time it was in his left cheek, until he swung in the direction the punch came from, only for a sharp pain to come from his left shoulder as a gash appeared on it. Damn it, he snarled to himself, standing back up after dropping to one knee from the pain. Looks like you're really struggling there, Kurosaki-san. Calm down, I can't panic. I have to push through the pain and focus, he thought to himself as he took a deep breath and prepared for Urahara's next attack. He focused on his ryatsu. He could see it clearly before he tried to push further past it, but it was like trying to run through water. He could see nothing but darkness before a glint of red popped up to the right, bringing Tensa up in that direction. He glad to feel it connect with another blade. Seconds later the force on his sword was gone before a shiver ran down his back, and he shunpoed a few meters to the left to avoid the attack at his back before taking a swing in the direction, but came up with nothing but air. 5 minutes later, Ichigo was starting to clearly see attacks that came within a meter of him, which didn't give him much time to dodge, but it was a start before his right radius snapped, forcing him to drop his bankai. Urahara looked on as he saw Ichigo's bankai drop before sighing. He had to admit that Ichigo made more progress than he thought he would, but his bankai was a concern. He sensed Tasai's ryatsu enter the shop along with the guest he asked him to bring as they descended down the stairs. Ah. Inoue-san, I am glad you came, he told her confused face cheerfully before she looked over at Ichigo and saw he was on one knee, leaning on Zangetsu, cuts all over his body and blood coming from his eyes. Kurosaki-kun! She shouted out with worry, surprising Ichigo. Inoue? What are you doing here? He asked painfully. I'll be there in a second to heal you, she cried as she prepared to run over to him, but Urahara grabbed her shoulder, causing her to give him a confused look. Heal his injuries and ryatsu, but do not heal his eyes, he told her seriously. Why? It's his training, he needs to be completely blinded for this exercise, and it is the only way to make him stronger. Before Inoue could protest, Ichigo spoke up. Please Inoue, listen to what he says. Kurosaki-kun, she said softly. This is the only way I can get stronger, please Inoue. After being healed up except for his eyes, he went back into his bankai and began fighting Urahara as Inoue was forced to watch on as she would have to heal whenever Ichigo's bankai collapsed. It was 5 in the afternoon when Inoue fully healed Ichigo for the last time, including his eyes, which he took with great pleasure to see again. After hours and hours of constantly fight blind in bankai and being healed, he was now able to hold it for 10 minutes without any strain and could accurately sense people's ryatsu in Urahara's training ground and store. He spent another hour manually forcing his ryatsu into its smaller shape with some success, being able to walk around with it for an hour before having his ryatsu forcibly sealed in the sword by Urahara's seal. On his way home, he found that he was able to sense ryatsu much better with the sealed sword as he didn't have his own giant ryatsu blocking his senses. He could feel Chad's depleted ryatsu from all of his training. He could feel Ishida, who appeared to be at the hospital, and Inoue was back at home. However, thanks to his improved senses, he felt a burst of ryatsu on the other side of the city before a much larger ryatsu appeared in the same area. Since his battle with his hollow, he could tell a significant difference between a Shinigami and a hollow ryatsu, and the ryatsu he was sensing was the largest from a hollow with the exception of his inner hollow. It felt familiar to him though, until he felt a shiver go through his right shoulder, which helped connected the dots of the last hollow that had stabbed him in the shoulder in the real world. Grand Fissure. Ichigo quickly released the seal, forcing his katana to go back to its large size before immediately going bankai in order to get there as fast as he could before someone else got it. Using Shunpa across the rooftops, it only took him a few minutes to reach his location, and was surprised at what he saw. The Grand Fissure he had known didn't look the same. His entire mask was left unbroken, and the upper half sat on his forehead. He also had fur all over his body and was much larger. His hollow hole was also higher than his previous appearance, and much to Ichigo's confusion, he carried a large zanpakuto on his back. Ichigo landed on the road and quickly took a look at his surroundings. He was quite pleased to see no people or cars driving in the area. Grand Fissure turned around to see Ichigo before letting out a big laugh. Kurosaki Ichigo, it's time for us to finish our battle. This time I will kill you. Unless you run away again, you son of a bitch. Ichigo snarled at him as he tightened his grip on Tensa Zangetsu's hilt. Seeing his sword, Grand Fissure once again let out a big laugh. What can you do with that puny zanpakuto? Your previous one was much stronger. And how can you defeat this zanpakuto, boy? He mocked before pulling off the large sword off his back. The size of a zanpakuto shows the size of the wielder's ryatsu. Mine surpasses yours by a long way, boy. He swung his blade downwards towards Ichigo and yelled, "Time to die, Kurosaki Ichigo." As the sword got closer, Ichigo merely raised his left hand and caught it, much to Grand Fissure's shock and horror, before he pulled it away and swung it again, but his time as hard as he could. That was a fluke. This time I'll put everything into it. Ichigo still didn't look up at the sword, keeping his gaze firmly on the ground, but Tensa Zangetsu was covered in blue ryatsu and Ichigo calmly swung it up to meet the sword, letting it meet Grand Fissure's. As the blades meet, Ichigo let out a wordless getsuga that completely sliced through Grand Fissure's sword and went onwards through his arm, making him give out a large screech in pain. He finally pushed through the pain to glare down at Ichigo, but to see him disappeared, only to see him just above him with his sword raised in the air. "This is for my mom. Getsuga Tensho." Once again he swung his blade down and let out a wave of blue ryatsu split cut through his mask along with the rest of his body, as his body dissolved into erasure. He landed back on the ground, releasing his bankai and resealing his sword along with adding Urahara's seal, and headed home with his heart a little lighter, unaware of the two people watching him. On his way home, however, he was intercepted by a man in wearing the same clothes he wore to his high school. He had brown eyes and jaw-length blonde hair with a straight cut. What caught Ichigo's attention was the fact that he was walking in mid-air and that he was carrying a zanpakuto. "So I finally found you, Kurosaki Ichigo. Do you know rude it was for you not to be at school today when I wanted to meet you? Who the hell are you? I mean, you should have to do my homework or something. Can you believe that we are given a test the first day back after holiday?" I asked who the hell you are. "Geez, what a pain in the ass. Do you really want to know so badly what I am? Okay then. He then lifted his hand to his forehead. Soon yellow Ryatsu started forming and Ichigo was shocked to see a hollow mask. It strongly resembled a pharaoh's mask, with a short, flowing hood hanging down the back of it. See? Check it out. What's this? A hollow mask? That's right. A zanpakuto and a hollow mask. You understand, don't ya? I am a Shinigami that has stepped into hollow territory. I am a Visard. I am your kin. Come to our side, Ichigo. You do not belong on this side. Ichigo stared at him before turning around and heading home in a different direction, much to Shinji's annoyance. Hey, damn it! Where you going, Ichigo? I am not finished talking yet. I'll pass, I am going home. I said I am not finished yet. Whatever it is, I don't want to hear it. Ichigo said, annoyed, and turned around to face him. I don't care what kind of organization your so-called Visard is. I have no desire to become friends with you all. I am a Shinigami. I am not your friend. He turned around and left, leaving a stunned Shinji behind before he sighed and reached out for his mobile phone and rang a number. Hello? It's Hirako. Is this Saragaki-san's cell phone? Sorry. Wrong number. The person on the other end started shouting at him real loud, forcing him to hold the phone away from his ear. I couldn't help it. You don't have to shout in my ear. It's just a matter of time. Let's be patient. Back at the location where Grand Fisher died. Bankai was a little bit overkill, wasn't it? Isshin claimed after watching the fight from the shadows. Reminds me of you back in the day, you two are a lot alike. Urahara teased him, much to Isshin's irritation. We are nothing alike. So how does it feel to be a Shinigami again after 20 years? It's alright. Thanks for the special Jugai. I didn't want Ichigo to sense my Ryatsu yet. I'll reveal it to him when the time is right. Speaking Ichigo, I have 2 questions. The first, is your conscience now clear with Ichigo killing that hollow? I never really had a grudge against that hollow. It was its nature, can't really blame it. The only one to blame for Masaki's death is me for not being able to protect her, that is all. I let Ichigo be the one to kill him to get some type of relief, as the idiot is full of guilt about it. Urahara nodded before asking Isshin seriously. Your son defeated his inner hollow, but before he fought it, I drained him of all of his Ryatsu in order to make it easier for us to defend against the hollow, but also in preparation for if Ichigo ever uses that technique. However, when the hollow went bankai, it was able to break through Bakuto S63, 75 and 99 even after being drained. Its Ryatsu was at a captain's level. I fear what it would have been like if I hadn't drained Ichigo's Ryatsu from the start. He has way more than Ryatsu than you had in your prime. There's no way that he should have this much Ryatsu, but you know why, don't you? Isshin sighed, before he looked at Urahara gravely and told. Yeah, I know why. You see, Masaki was... A week had passed since Ichigo had begun training with Urahara, and he had improved rapidly. His bankai no longer put any strain on his body. He could hold the sealed sword naturally, which Urahara told him was the most basic Ryatsu control skill and that it took him way too long to master. He also could sense everyone with Ryatsu in Karakura town if he focused hard enough. Chad had improved as well, though not as much as Ichigo. His reflexes improved along with his speed, but he still didn't have the speed to keep up with the Shuinpa. He had grown closer to Zangetsu. He discovered that Zangetsu wanted more trees, plants and grass added in their inner world, and that he also enjoyed seeing the sunset and sunrise. So Ichigo, one night, manifested Zangetsu into the real world and both watched a sunset together, making their bond stronger. He didn't have much luck with Tensa's Zangetsu, however, who gave him a congratulations on being able to use his bankai without straining himself anymore, but wouldn't tell him anything else he had to do in order to gain his power. He hadn't seen Inoue since that day when she came to heal him, but knew that she still attended school, which was fine to Ichigo, as he knew that she wasn't a fighter. He hadn't seen Ishida since he got his powers back, but he knew that Ishida would be training hard in order to help him protect this town and to surpass him. It was now a Monday afternoon and Ichigo was currently at home having a day off. He needed to give his body a rest, but more importantly, he needed a mental break. He had been training and fighting every day. He was only 15 years old. He had to do other things too. So right now he was currently lying on his bed reading a book that he had been assigned for school when all of a sudden there was a huge burst of Ryatsu that penetrated the air, and it was larger than any other hollow he had ever felt before. He quickly pulled out his Shinigami badge and pressed it against his chest, releasing his Shinigami form, and then jumped out the window and headed towards the park where they were located. Soul Society. In the meeting hall in the barracks of the 1st Division, the remaining 10 Taicho of the Godai 13 were having a meeting about the upcoming war. However, usually it would just be the captains, but this time the Fukuteichos, except for Hinamori, who was still in a coma, and a few others, were included. We are here to plan the upcoming war against the traitorous Aizen and his army of Arrancars. 10th Division Taicho, Hitsugaya Toshiro, will lead the Karakura Town Protection Division. Yamamoto, the Taicho commander of the Godai 13, ordered. He had the appearance of an old man with red eyes, a very long white beard, and long eyebrows. He was looking straight at Hitsugaya, who had the appearance of a child, had turquoise eyes and short, spiked, white hair. He wears a standard sleeveless Taicho's Haori with a green sash around his shoulders, held together by a round clip. The sash held his zanpakuto sheath in place on his back and is tied to it at either end. "Yes, sir," he said, which the commander nodded in return. "The members that will be working under him are his Fukuteicho Matsumoto Ranjuku," he said, looking at the woman who had long and wavy blonde hair, blue eyes, full lips, and a beauty mark located under the right side of her mouth. She was well known for her curvaceous figure. Her most distinctive feature of it was her very large breasts. She dressed in the garb typical of Shinigami, though she let her robes hang loose for her ample bosom to be revealed. She wore a thin golden necklace tucked between her cleavage and a long pink scarf over her shoulders. In addition, her lieutenant's armband was worn on her uniform's sash, as opposed to around the arm. She carried her zanpakuto behind her back. 6th Division's Fukuteicho, Abarai Rinji, he said, looking at the man who had brown eyes and long crimson hair, which was kept in a high ponytail and had black tattoos on his face. He wore a standard Shinigami outfit. Though he wore a white headband around his forehead, he carried his zanpakuto on his hip. 11th Division's 3rd Seat, Madarei Mikaku. He was a bald man who tried to deny it. He had distinctive small red markings at the outer corner of his eyes. He wore the regular Shinigami outfit and favored carrying his zanpakuto in its sheath. 11th Division's 5th Seat, Ayasegawa Yumachika. Yumachika wore the standard Shinigami Shihakusho uniform with some customizations. An orange piece of clothing sat on top of his uniform around the neck, which covered most of his chest that would otherwise be exposed by his uniform. This is connected to an orange sleeve on his right arm under the much looser fitting sleeve of the uniform. Yumachika had colorful feathers on his right eyelashes and eyebrow. He had shiny skin, purple eyes, and jaw-length black hair, which, in conjunction with the feathers, gave him a somewhat feminine appearance. The final member will be Kichiki Rukia from the 13th Division. She has her powers back and is familiar with Karakura Town. Rukia wore the standard Shinigami Shihakusho uniform. She was short and petite, and she had pale skin, violet-colored eyes and black hair, with one strand of hair always hanging between her eyes. "Yes, sir," they all said in union, while Kenpachi pouted. With those two gone, he would have to do most of the paperwork, while they get to go off and fight strong opponents. Byakuya meanwhile kept his emotionless mask up, but his eyes gave Rinji a look that made him shiver. It was a look with promises of what would happen if Rukia was hurt. He would also kill the Kurosaki boy if anything happened to her. "We have some vision of the latest Arrancars to appear in the living world, Kuratsuchi Teichu if you would." The 12th Division Taicho had a very skeletal look with a skull-like visage. His face was painted entirely white with the inner portion of his face painted black with the exception of his nose. His eyes were a golden color, and he constantly bared his teeth, giving the appearance of him constantly smiling. Both his ears were seemingly replaced with stubbed golden cones. His fingernails were blue and, with the exception of the fingernail on his right middle finger, were all short. The one long fingernail was long as the finger itself. He also wore a white hat with two ends that point to his right, and a large purple scarf around his neck. His whole body, even his face and hands, had been painted black and white. He held up a projector that when he turned it on, it displayed a big picture in the center of the room for all to see, and in the picture they saw a large hollow appear from the garganta which Rukia immediately recognized. "Grand Fisher," she breathed, catching most looks from the room. "You know the Grand Fisher?" Yukite Taicho asked her. His white hair was worn long, almost reaching his waist. He wore it parted on the left side with one long piece that tended to fall over his right eye, and he had green eyes. He wore the common Shinigami uniform with a long-sleeved Taicho's Haori, and a crimson lining. He wore a narrow white obi, in which he secured his zanpakuto s. Yeah, when Ichigo had my Shinigami powers, he fought the Grand Fisher to a draw before it fled. My, even before he came to Soul Society, Kurosaki Ichigo was defying the odds. Kairaku Shunsui, the 8th Division Taicho, spoke up. He had gray eyes and long wavy brown which was tied in a long ponytail, and had long bangs that framed the left side of his face. He wore a straw hat and a pink, flowered lady's kimono, which was draped across his shoulders and over his captain's uniform. He had thin facial hair around his mouth and on his cheeks. Speaking of Ichigo-kun, Yukitake said as Ichigo appeared on screen behind Grand Fisher in his bankai. That boy can't resist flaunting his bankai. Byakuya scoffed. He had slate gray eyes and long black hair, which he kept up in intricate white headpieces that symbolize his nobility as the head of the Kuchiki family. One was on top of his head and another on the right side. He wore the standard captain uniform along with a white scarf, and he wore fingerless white gloves that cover only the back of his hands. That's Ichigo's bankai? I can't wait to battle him again. A nice simple sword for a bankai, none of this huge bankai crap. Kenpachi said with a huge maniac grin on his face. He wore a sleeveless Taicho's Haori that had a ragged look to it. He had spiky hair with small bells at its tips and wore an eye patch on his right eye. He had green eyes, pronounced hairless eyebrow ridges and a huge scar running down the left side of his face. Instead of an extension-type bankai, Kurosaki's is a compression. Byakuya told him, which only fueled Kenpachi's desire to fight Ichigo again. Kurosaki Ichigo, it's time for us to finish our battle. This time I will kill you. Unless you run away again, you son of a bitch. Wow, I have never heard Ichigo this angry before. Renji, which Byakuya had to agree. Even though he tried to execute Rukia, the boy was never this angry at him. Rukia looked down, knowing exactly why he was angry. It doesn't matter how angry he is, there is no need for him to go bankai against an opponent like this, and he is just being reckless. Soifin said. She was a relatively short and petite woman with gray eyes and black hair. Her hair was worn short with 2 long braids bound in white cloth, each ending in a large golden ring. She wore the traditional Shinigami Taicho's uniform with a sleeveless Haori and a yellow obi tied around her waist. That is not why he is in bankai. Rukia spoke up before cringing, expecting reprimanded for talking out of turn. Speak your mind, Kuchiki Rukia, the commander said. When Ichigo was 9 years old, he told me that his family all revolved around his mom, but then she was murdered and Ichigo felt responsible until he found out that it was the Grand Fisher that killed her. There are 2 reasons why he is in bankai: to show Fisher the difference in their powers and also so that he is quick enough to stop him in case he escapes. Murmurs were heard throughout the room before they all watched Ichigo kill the Grand Fisher, which Kenpachi again expressed his interest in fighting Ichigo again. I think we are focusing off the reason why we are watching this. Unohana Retsu spoke up. She had blue eyes and black hair. She wore the standard Shinigami Taicho uniform apart from using an obi instead of the normal sash. Her hair was long and was always worn as a large braid in front. Unlike most Shinigami who carries their zanpakuto in their sash, Unohana had a large string attached to the sheath of her zanpakuto and carried it over her shoulder. Yes, while the Grand Fisher was weak, he was the most stable Arrancar we have ever seen, and they are developing at a much faster rate than we had anticipated. And that means? Kuratsuchi spoke up. Aizen Sosuke. Kamamura growled. Kamamura was an anthropomorphic wolf. His fur was light brown in color, which was the same color as his gloves. He also wore shoulder pads over his haori and large, plated boots instead of sandals. The Karakura Town Protection Division will depart in 3 days while the other tie. The commander was cut off, however, when a light on the projector flashed red and beeping sound went off. What is that? Hitsugai asked as Kuratsuchi pressed a few buttons on the projector before the screen changed to an image of a park in Karakura with a large crater in the middle. 2 enormous hollow ryatsus were detected in Karakura. I am going to a live feed. Real world. Chad and Inoue had gotten there first, and were shocked by the amount of dead bodies that were lying in the grass. Inoue looked to see a weakened Tatsuki and ran over to help her. Chad told her to get her out of there, and that he would hold them off before activating his right arm. Okiora, is this the one? The big one asked, with tan skin and a ridge-lined cranium, brown eyes and black hair. He had long, bushy sideburns and a thin ponytail, and the top of his head was bald. He also had orange eyebrows and red markings under his eyes. The remains of his hollow mask were the jawbone complete with 8 teeth, which rested on his chin. A tattoo of the number 10 was on his left shoulder. You should improve your investigation abilities, Yami. He is trash. Okiura said emotionlessly. He was a slender, yet fairly muscular, average height with a melancholic appearance, fairly short, messy black hair, pale white skin, a black upper lip, and green eyes with small slit-shaped pupils similar to a cat's. Part of his bangs fell between his eyes, and he had distinctively thick eyebrows. He had teal lines that descend from his eyes, making it appear as if he was crying. He wore a white jacket, black sash, and a white hakama. His hollow hole was located on his sternum. The remainder of his hollow mask lied on top of his head, forming a broken horned helmet. Too bad. Yami shouted before attempting to punch Chad, who thanks to his training with Yoruichi, whose attacks was much faster, was able to dodge and charged up his Ryatsu in his arm. He fired it at point-blank range. El Directo. When the Ryatsu cleared, Yami was revealed to only have a slight bruise on his cheek and a tiny bit of blood flowing from his bottom lip. Is that all? He asked before he swung his fist, and Chad attempted to block it, but the force of the hit broke his arm in several places, forcing him unconscious. Sato-kun. Inoue yelled out in worry before attempting to heal him, which caught Okiura's interest as he observed it to be time reversal technique. It was the first time he had ever witnessed a move like this. She fired her Koten Zanshuin at Yami, who calmly brushed it aside with little interest before asking Okiura. Is she trash too? Yeah, kill her, Yami. As he swung his fist towards Inoue's head intending to kill her, it was stopped in its tracks by a katana belonging to Ichigo, who had just arrived in time. He looked down at Chad and frowned in worry and anger at his friend's injuries, then looking at Inoue, and he told her. Inoue, back away, I'll end this quickly. Inoue nodded before she went over to Chad's side to focus on healing his injuries, while Ichigo put his left hand on his right arm and shouted. Bankai! After a huge explosion of Ryatsu, Ichigo stood before Yami, who just scratched his head looking confused before he asked. Did you say Bankai? Okiura, is he the one? Yes. Who would have thought with all your flailing about could smoke him out so easily? Orange hair, black Bankai, there is no mistaking it. This is our target, Yami. So this saves us the trouble of looking for him. Yami laughed before cocking his fist back, and as he went to punch him he shouted. I'm lucky. However, his punch was stopped in its tracks by Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu as he blocked it with the tip of the sword facing the ground. Ichigo glared at Yami's astonished look. Were you the one that did that to Chad's arm? What about it? Ichigo jumped over him as Okiura's eyes widened for a second as Yami's arm was cleaved off, causing him to shout in pain before he swung his other arm at Ichigo, who merely shunpoed out of the way. Damn you, brat! Yami growled at him while Ichigo calmly rested his sword against his shoulder and said, You can still stand? You're just as tough as you appear. You're having quite a time there, aren't you? Do you want me to fight him for you? Okiura spoke up from behind him, making him turn his head towards him and shout. Shut up. He grabbed the handle of his sword. Are you going to use your zanpakuto on a runt like this? I told you to shut up. A zanpakuto? First Fisher comes back with one, then these guys. What are these guys? They have a broken hollow mask, a hole in their chest, and a zanpakuto. Could they be related to Hirako and me? Ichigo thought to himself, but by the way that the other one was talking, it seemed that using their swords makes them stronger, so he couldn't let him. As Yami began pulling out his zanpakuto, Ichigo shunpoed past him, cutting off his remaining arm, causing his zanpakuto to fall onto the ground with his arm. Yami yelled out in pain as lost his other arm before glaring at Ichigo. Not bad, now Yami can't use his zanpakuto or use his release. This kid is interesting, and I heard that he only just recently learned Bankai, but still at this level he doesn't pose any threat to Aizen-sama. Still, why is he so interested in this boy? Okiura thought to himself. He closed his eyes and began sensing Ichigo's Ryatsu. Thanks to his investigative powers, he was able to dig deep in Ichigo's Ryatsu before his eyes widened in shock. That brat has that much Ryatsu. It's also much darker than any other Shinigami's, and it's almost like a hollow's. He has a larger Ryatsu than myself. He truly is an intriguing Shinigami. One I am very interested in seeing how he will progress. How dare you cut off both of my arms? Yami yelled at Ichigo, who was only standing in front of him only a few feet away from before. To Ichigo's surprise, a red zero began forming in his mouth. He fired it before Ichigo had a chance to dodge, and the zero hit before an explosion occurred and dust and rubble filled the air as Yami began laughing. Ha ha! There is no way he would be able to dodge my zero at this range. Dodge what? A voice said through the dust as Yami's eyes widened in shock as he saw Ichigo standing there in a similar position to when he blocked his inner hollow's zero. When the zero shot at him, Ichigo had instinctively went into this stance, and he could have sworn he saw a big circle of blue Ryatsu surround him and block the zero, but he couldn't be sure. Impossible, Yami whispered before there was a slash from his right hip up to his left shoulder as blood poured out of his body. He saw Ichigo standing behind him. He couldn't keep up the brat's movements as he sank to his knees, gritting his teeth in pain. Ichigo turned around and swung Tensa Zangetsu towards the right side of Yami's unprotected neck, but it was stopped as an arm blocked its path. Ichigo's eyes widened as he saw Ulquiorra holding his arm up with Tensa hitting his forearm, but Ichigo's shock was more the fact that he hadn't cut through his arm more than him coming to protect his comrade. Ulquiorra? Yami asked, but was hit in the face and sent into the ground by Ulquiorra's free arm. Pathetic, Yami, to get beaten so easily. You don't deserve to be in the Espada. I'll test this run myself. Ichigo leapt back as he looked at Ulquiorra warily before Ulquiorra vanished before his eye and appeared behind him slightly to his left side and aimed a kick at him. Utilizing his Shunpa, Ichigo was able to dodge the attack and swung his sword at Ulquiorra's right side, but Ulquiorra saw his every movement and caught his sword in his right hand. Ichigo's eyes widened until he coughed up blood as he was kneed in the gut, followed by a kick into the face and sent flying into the trees. He got up painfully, holding his gut, and then reaching up to wipe the blood away from his lip as he gingerly touched his cheek, which he could tell the cheekbone was broke. Damn it, how strong is this guy? He hasn't even used his zanpakuto, he thought to himself, as Ulquiorra took the time to look at his forearm followed by his hand. Both the places where his sword connected with my hierro, there is bruising, still I want to see the power he is hiding. He vanished and appeared right in front of Ichigo and attempted to grab his throat, but Ichigo was able to shunpa away in order to get some distance. He couldn't cut him, so he needed to think of a new plan. He remembered what Kenpachi had told him back in their fight at Soul Society. The Ryatsu that I leak unconsciously is stronger than that sword you created by honing your Ryatsu to its peak in order to kill your enemy. So he needed more Ryatsu through his blade than he was putting in currently in. Coming up with an idea, he gathered Ryatsu in Tensa like he would to prepare for a Getsuga. However, instead of releasing the energy, he kept it on the blade as it was surrounded by a blue aura, much to Ulquiorra's interest, before he shot towards him. Once he reached him, he swung his blade down, targeting the left side of his chest, and Ulquiorra once again put his arm out to block the attack, but when the attack connected, it cut a little bit through his skin. Ulquiorra's eyes widened and jumped back, but Ichigo using Shunpa was back in striking range, and this time when Ichigo swung down towards his chest he roared. Getsuga Tensho. The explosion of blue Ryatsu blocked Inoue and Yami, who was struggling to get up, views of the result of the blast. Ichigo was bent over, the tip of his sword piercing the ground as he took in some deep breaths. That was by far the strongest Getsuga Tensho he had ever fired. Was it because I kept gathering Ryatsu into my blade a lot more than usual? Or is because my control over my Ryatsu has improved and made it easier for Zangetsu to amplify? He thought to himself, resolving to talk to Zangetsu about it later. He was snapped out of his thoughts as he saw Ulquiorra from the dust. Ichigo's eyes widened at the state he was in. He had a small gash running down the right side of chest, and it must have only been 30 centimeters long. For him to only suffer such a small wound from such a powerful attack meant that he was in big trouble, unless he used his ace in the hole. Ichigo clenched his fist, trying to force himself to put on the mask. Ever since he had defeated his inner hollow, he had not once put on the mask. He didn't want anything to do with his hollow powers. He only fought and defeated him so he would leave him alone, but now he had no choice but to use them. I've had enough, Ulquiorra declared emotionlessly before pointing his right index finger at Ichigo, and green Ryatsu gathered in front of it. He fired the zero at Ichigo, and it came at him at such speed that he had no time to dodge, and when it was seconds before it hit him, he dragged the air in front of his face, bringing his mask forward and attempting to block the zero with his sword. His mask had been destroyed. his right sleeve completely destroyed along with half of his coat. There was blood coming down from his forehead, and his whole right side of his chest and arm that was holding Tensa Zangetsu was all burnt. He fell to his knees from the pain and exhaustion that had suddenly overcome him. It seemed that the mask burnt a lot of his ryatsu, but if he didn't use it, he probably would have been dead by now. For a split second before my Zero hit, his ryatsu shot up exponentially, but now his ryatsu has depleted to the point that a simple Jillian Arrancars could handle. Whatever that special power he used, he can only use it for a short amount of time, and it drains all of his ryatsu. It is not as powerful as I thought. He isn't worth killing, but he has potential. I should kill him here just in case. Ulquiorra thought before preparing another Zero. This time you won't survive. He fired the Zero towards the immobilized Ichigo, but a flash at the corner of his eye caught his attention as it grabbed Ichigo and dodged the Zero. He looked over to where Inoue was to see Shihoin Yoruichi holding Ichigo along with Urahara Kisuke with his sword out. My, looks like we made it in time. Good thing you're so fast, Yoruichi-san. I've told you before, Kisuke, I am called the goddess of flash for a reason. Ichigo's bankai faded away, signaling that he had lost consciousness. Yoruichi laid him on the ground next to Chad as Inoue, who was filled with worry watching Ichigo get beaten up, had her healing techniques around him as well as Chad. Kurosaki-san has improved a lot in the last week. For him to do so little damage in his bankai shows this guy can't be taken lightly. Yeah, I know, us fighting together just like the old days at Kisuke? Sure is. There is no need, Ulquiorra interrupted them as he walked over to the now standing albeit weakly Yami before picking up both of his arms and opening a garganta. Running away are you? Ulquiorra brushed aside the taunt and told her. I have completed the mission I was sent here on. The Shinigami that Aizen-sama had set his eyes on is trash that isn't worth killing. After that they both disappeared as the garganta closed, leaving those left in the park in slight confusion and looking at Ichigo's injuries a shiver of fear. Soul Society. When she saw Sato go down, she began to feel concern of the friend she had met through Ichigo, and when she saw Inoue's attack be deflected she felt fear for her female friend. Then Ichigo appeared with an angry look on his face at seeing Sato's injuries before going into his bankai. Bankai? It still amazed her that the human she had given her powers only a few months back had achieved bankai in such a short time, when she who had been a Shinigami for 40 years and not achieved. Also, he achieved it in order to save her. The amount of determination Ichigo had when his friends were in danger, nothing would stop him from protecting them. She watched as he took apart the tall Arrancars with ease, slicing up both of his arms and his chest, and then went in the finishing blow. She heard her Nisama say that he had improved since he left Soul Society, which surprised her, as she would have thought that he would have gotten a bit sloppy with school and his normal life. Kenpachi also expressed even keener interest in fighting Ichigo again, and she couldn't help but shiver for her friend whenever he met Kenpachi again. Then it went all wrong when she saw the smaller Arrancars block his sword with just his arm, followed by the beating he gave Ichigo, and then finally the Zero that had badly damaged him. When she saw the Arrancars preparing another Zero and with Ichigo too injured to dodge, her heart had leapt to her throat as she began to pale, but thankfully Yoruichi and Urahara saved him. After living with Ichigo for all those months, then him coming to save her, he had become her best friend and the person she trusted more than anyone. Once the Arrancars had left and the projector turned off, questions began being asked as they were all astounded by the power of the small Arrancars. Let us pray that he was a vasto Lord Arrancars. Yukitake said, drawing some looks from everyone that was not a captain. What do you mean? How can that be a good thing? Ibe-san asked. It would be a good thing because then we would have seen what a vasto Lord Arrancars was capable of. Imagine if he was just an Ajuch's Arrancars. Then imagine the kind of power a vasto Lord would be like. Shunsui explained to him, which drew some scared looks from the Fukutecho. Another factor that we have to look at is that they battled in the real world. If the fight had been in Hueco Mundo, or here in Soul Society, they would have been stronger. Soifun added, before Hitsugaya chimed in. Let's not forget that Kurosaki Ichigo could barely cut him in his bankai. I know all of you have different opinions of him, but there is a fact we must be aware of. Kurosaki defeated Madarame, Aburai and Kenpachi Taicho all before he had achieved bankai, and then he defeated Kichiki Taicho with his bankai. Yet he couldn't cut him. We are all going to have to train hard if we want to win this war. The commander slammed his wooden staff into the ground and ordered. The Karakura Town Protection Squad will depart tomorrow instead to aid Kurosaki Ichigo in repelling the Arrancars, while all Taicho and Fukuteicho will give their paperwork to their third seats or lower and prepare for the war. Thanks for watching this video. You really enjoy this video. Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow DiscoStew09 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.